Check out carmarshal.com. The link is in the description. They help support us.
In the possession
Or
of that
might
individual.
take the firearms first and then go to court, because that's another system, because a lot of times by the time you go to court, it takes so long to go to court to get the due process procedures. I like taking the guns early, like in this crazy man's case that just took place in Florida. He had a lot of firearms, they saw everything. To go to court would have taken a long time. So you could do exactly what you're saying, but take the guns first, go through due process second.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report.
State Congress passes bill to confiscate legal guns from all 18-20-year-olds. The Illinois House has passed a bill that will force legal gun owners to turn in their weapons to the government or become criminals overnight. By Matt Agorist, March 11, 2018. Illinois. The Illinois House has passed a bill that will require legal gun owners to hand over ownership of heretofore legally possessed guns. Now, this most tyrannical bill has moved to the Senate and is one step away from becoming law. The bill, HB 1465, was sponsored in the House by Representative Michelle Musman, D. Schomburg, and passed with a vote of 64 to 51 last month. The legislation would prohibit anyone under 21 years old from buying or possessing commonly owned semi-automatic rifles, high-capacity weapons that can hold more than 10 rounds, their subsequent attachments, and .50 caliber rifles and cartridges. They would have 90 days to turn in their guns to the government or become criminals. Naturally, those opposed to the bill have been outspoken, pointing out the tyranny of the government stealing once legally owned property from individuals based on the arbitrary number of birthdays they've had. Musman claims that the bill won't have cops going door to door to confiscate weapons yet, but it will make keeping your once legal gun a crime. Rest assured that this is the exact same model that Donald Trump is pushing for on the federal level, as he has already been outspoken about taking guns from 18-20-year-old adults. Earlier this month, President Donald Trump betrayed his base and Americans in general as he advocated for confiscating guns with no due process. I like taking the guns early, like in this crazy man's case that just took place in Florida. To go to court would have taken a long time, Trump said at a meeting with lawmakers on school safety and gun violence. Take the guns first, go through due process second, Trump said. This blatant attack on the very thing that makes America great, due process, has been in the making since before the Florida shooting, but Trump appears to be striking while the iron is hot. And his supporters couldn't care less. View image on Twitter. View image on Twitter. Matt Agorist. At Matt Agorist. Hashtag due process is not negotiable. 1:56 p.m., March 1, 2018. 22. See Matt Agorist's other tweets. Twitter adds info and privacy. Earlier this month, President Trump told a group of lawmakers that they must do something to keep guns away from mentally ill individuals, even if that means raising the minimum age for rifle ownership to 21 and making all 18 to 20-year-olds who have guns, criminals overnight. He is also going after gun parts as well. His attack on the Constitution has gotten him praise by the left and is met with silence by his supporters, who are conducting mental gymnastics to praise this man who is calling for the removal of due process and the removal of their right to self-defense. While the current legislation in Illinois claims to only go after semi-automatic rifles, the wording of the bill also makes it possible to go after handguns too if they decide to interpret the definition in a certain way. As the bill states, it will ban any weapon with a shroud that is attached to, or partially, or completely encircles the barrel. This could technically be applied to most modern handguns. Indeed, the now expired federal assault weapons ban included a barrel shroud in its list of features for which a semi-automatic pistol could be banned. 2 features in the list were required, the logic being that a barrel shroud would be cool enough for a shooter to grip and better control their firearm. It seems that the hollow claim by government that nobody wants to confiscate your guns is nothing more than a pack of lies used to calm those who aren't paying attention. Make no mistake, Even if this bill does not affect you directly, it is just the beginning. Government works in increments to erode everyone's rights, but slowly enough so people can continue to think it won't affect me. Remember this warning for the future, as more and more people are stripped of their right to defend themselves. First, they came for the under 21-year-olds.
In the possession
Or
of that
might
individual.
take the firearms first and then go to court, because that's another system, because a lot of times by the time you go to court, it takes so long to go to court to get the due process procedures. I like taking the guns early, like in this crazy man's case that just took place in Florida. He had a lot of firearms, they saw everything. To go to court would have taken a long time. So you could do exactly what you're saying, but take the guns first, go through due process second.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you.
Good to have you back, Dr. Paul.
Oh, very good. It's good to be back and ready and raring to go. Wish we had some very good news for everybody, but we're going to be talking about a problem that came to our attention. We've been talking about school shootings, and media is, engulfed with it. But there was a major meeting yesterday, at the White House, and the president was there, of course, and he had significant Republicans and significant Democrats. So it was bipartisan, so you can expect our problems to be solved, because as soon as they get together, they come together, and liberty is always promoted when it's bipartisan. Being facetious, obviously, because I think that is the detriment of the country, is too many things are bipartisan, and too often they agree to making things worse, whether it's spending, going to war, or printing more money. This bipartisanship is an endorsement of a bad philosophy, and I think that's what happened yesterday. But I think the shocker was the president came down on the side of more regulation. I believe he's contradicting what he alluded to in his campaign, and he was endorsed by the NRA, I believe, and all of a sudden he's taking on the NRA, conservatives, the Second Amendment, and it's pretty amazing. I cannot see how this is a strategically beneficial move for him, and I think he's wrong politically and constitutionally to say that this is a reason why we have to have more regulations, because sometimes there are bad things that happen. Matter of fact, bad things seem to happen frequently. But putting this in perspective, this isn't, and it's not like there's an epidemic that we went through, but there's an epidemic. There's an epidemic of the people who take advantage of this, because when people die, it's very easy to become very emotional and not objective. And when it comes to guns in schools, I think what happens, it really brings out the authoritarian demagogues. Any chance they have to have an answer to a problem with more authoritarianism, more government, less liberty, I think this fits that category.
And there sure were a lot of gasps when he was sitting there. Here's Feinstein on one side, Cornyn from Texas on the other. And he says, you got to get the guns first. Grab the guns first, then we'll worry about due process later. And Feinstein, of course, was giddy. She was giggling. She was thrilled. Cornyn had a pretty stone face, and he's not exactly the most conservative. Now, you could say this was kind of a gaffe. He shot from the hip, his instincts, take the guns first, due process later. But even if it was a shot from the hip, even if it was him thinking outside, his mouth running before his brain was running, it does show something that I think you've said all along, which are his instincts. He has authoritarian instincts.
Yeah, and Senator Ben Sasse brought that up to him. He confronted him. He didn't back down. And, of course, he has challenged the president before. But I think his short statement that he made is worth reading, because he was confronting the president right to his face. And this is what Senator Sasse said. He said, quote, "Strong leaders don't automatically agree with the last thing that was said to them. We have the Second Amendment and due process of law for a reason. We're not ditching any constitutional protections simply because the last person the president talked to today doesn't like them." Now, I think the president's been, people have accused him of that in the past, but this is pretty serious, and he really catches them here. But it's to me sad that it works that way. He doesn't come from a systematic, fundamental belief in anything. You know, it's all over the place, and it can be both places too. You know, have it one day one way, one day the next day, and now here's another flip-flop on them. It's interesting to see what this does. You know, he's already announced he wants to be president for another 7 years, so I can't imagine this won't start nibbling away at some of the people that really got excited about him with his populism.
Yeah, you mentioned even early on the political downside of this. I can't imagine. You've got the left is seethes with hatred toward him, and unfortunately in many cases irrational hatred, because they don't even talk about his policies. They don't like his hair. They don't like the way he looks. They think that Russia is under his bed or something. They seethe with hatred. The so-called moderates hate him. A lot of the neocons hate him. The Bill Kristol types hate him. He's got a group of, what Hillary called the deplorables, and he's been their champion, and they've been attracted, and they like guns.
Yes.
And they're law-abiding people for the most part, too. So undermining that base is politically insane.
And they touched on several specifics, the assault weapons ban, and this whole idea that you take your guns first and due process comes later. That is something else. And when he made that statement, it reminded me of how the system has worked. What about the NDAA? This authority that's been around, and Trump didn't invent it.
Yeah.
This was in the Bush era, the NDAA. You arrest people, and then Obama extended that. You can kill Americans, assassinate Americans, and deal with the due process later. And sometimes people get arrested, and if you happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time and you don't get charged and you don't get a trial, you can get put in prison in Guantanamo or some other place, for life, essentially. So that attitude is very bad, and it's the rejection of the principle that the founding fathers tried to give us regarding guns and defending ourselves. And they weren't wishy-washy. Sometimes liberals will try to say, well, the Second Amendment means that the militia is allowed to own guns, which is a bunch of baloney. It says the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Yeah. The purpose being so that you can participate in a militia which provides for your safety and security in a local way. But I think there's been court cases that sort of has refuted that and say it is an individual liberty. But when you come along and get people ready to write these regulations, I think they forget this. And it'll be sad if they have an erosion of that and going back to this thing where they're going to regulate one type of gun without really dealing with the issue of whether or not the people have a right to defend themselves.
Yeah, it's funny actually, because ironically Trump was right. Due process, who cares about due process? And you're right, the NDAA is an example, FISA is an example. There's no due process. They just vacuum up all of our communications. How many other examples? So, ironically, he is right. The due process, who cares about it?
He also had a statement about, what about this thing about the police? The cops have the right to stretch the law? Yeah. That, of course, it really invites a lot of problems, too.
We already have those kinds of problems, and I think he suggested that the police should have leeway above and beyond what the law gives them to take away people's guns if they think that person is a bad person. Yeah. So that is dangerous.
I think the other assumption is that the big picture is who's responsible for safety? And our country has gotten to the point where it's the government's job to make us safe and secure, that you have a safety net and you are protected. There's a policeman on every corner and we're all going to be safe and secure. But, if you carry that through, and many of them do, just think of how many things that they have on their plate. Because it looks to me like there's not, the crisis that we have is serious, and you can't belittle it. But compared to even assaults and killing in schools, it hasn't been getting worse.
Yeah, and this is something that's interesting. This came out just a couple of days ago, February 26th. It's a study by James Allen Fox, who's a professor of criminology, law, and public policy at Northeastern University. And he just simply looked at statistics and he gave a list, people can look it up, a list of where he went for statistics, and he discovered that school shootings have actually been on a steady decline since the 1990s. So there's a lot of hype in the press, you know, for a reason, for propaganda reason. But he said there 4 times the number of children were killed in schools in the early 90s than are killed now in schools. And he also found that more kids are killed in bicycle accidents and pool drownings than shootings. So this is being exploited.
And there was no increase when assault weapons were legalized.
Yeah, because Columbine, I guess, was when the assault weapons were illegal.
And
it didn't have any effect.
The whole thing. But it's Pandora's box, really, is what they open up when government's there to make us safe and secure. What if you come up with a statistic to show that a lot of people get killed when they drive their automobiles over 60 miles an hour,
yeah,
in a theoretical sense? If that were the case, why wouldn't the answer be to put a governor on the car?
Yeah.
Don't let anybody drive over 60 miles an hour. Yeah. By that time, the people would probably rebel.
Yeah.
You know, that's going too far.
Especially in Texas.
We don't. I don't think we need that much safety around here. But there are so many things that government does get involved in. You know, they're always involved in nutritional advice, and it's always a disaster. You know, since the Food and Drug Administration been around, you know, we've had worse foods put on the marketplace, and it's the private market, the holistic type people who introduces the notions to some of the nutritional product. What if they decided sugar was bad for us? Which for some people it's bad for us. But what do? We get protectionism of the sugar, so that we keep the cheap sugar out, and we get in there, we get involved in the sugar business, and then a lot of people suffer the consequences. There are so many things that if they were, I hate to mention, they ought to be consistent. No, I don't want them to be consistent. They're liable to be consistent.
Yeah.
Oh, we have a lot more work to do, so therefore we have to have more and more regulation. Here they're saying that we have this problem, it's emotional, it's horrible, we need more regulations that's going to solve the problem. And I think my bottom line is, if you resort to regulations, you'll probably create more problems, you'll undermine liberties, and you will not solve the problem of the shootings. Your statistical report there, I think, verifies that.
And Professor Fox is interesting because who did this study. You read what he wrote. He's not against gun control. Matter of fact, he's in favor of gun control. He strikes me as kind of a typical liberal professor. But here's what he said. He's in favor of gun control, but he says, in these measures, they will not prevent school shootings, these kind of measures that they're talking about, because they're already very, very rare. He says this kind of school shooting, these mass shootings, are so rare that these additional measures won't do anything to prevent them.
I can't help but think that it's much more difficult to provide safety in a school. The bigger it is, I think the more difficult it is, you know, and the schools are so big and gigantic. And just, and I don't know whether it could be verified by statistics, but I would think a school that has 300 people would be easier to manage than one that has 3,000.
Yeah.
I think if you have 300, everybody knows everybody by their first name. And of course, the other example when it comes to schools is, you know, private schools, you don't read or hear about this. And of course, some people argue that when you put up a sign as a gun-free zone, that might motivate them. I never know whether they have proof of that, but it certainly looks that way, that usually when there's no guns, we end up seeing some of these mass shootings. But I think it's tragic that this happens, because I happen to believe that some of the private industries and private schools and all, it's not like they don't care. They usually have some type of protection, you know, that they can provide. So even, I was just sort of pondering the thought, what if you did have a big school? And instead of depending on the sheriffs, that you wonder, you know, are they qualified and will they really, you know, defend the kids and this sort of thing? What if you hired, what if there were private groups to go in there? They do it for industries,
yeah,
and they do a pretty good job. I would visualize if you had a private security force, and they were responsible for the security of these schools that they could hit, they would be rewarded. You know, they're getting paid to do it, and maybe more people would want them, and they would have a strong motivation. But I don't think we're on the move. You know, it's likely to happen, but I think it's worth thinking about because you know, private industry a lot of times can do a better job than the bureaucrats, and certainly the bureaucrat who wants more laws. I just don't think that's the answer, especially when it so explicitly violates one of the most straightforward amendments we have to the Constitution. They just want to throw this out. But this is real challenging because you know, a few years ago, I was under the impression that you know, the Democrats don't even talk about guns anymore because they always lose the fight, and then all of a sudden it's up front, and it's a big issue again. But what did we see in the papers after this happened? When the dust settled for about one day, then they had a gun show or a gun store, and more people there than ever.
Oh, yeah.
And yet, what were you hearing on TV? 78% of the American people want more controls and get rid of the guns and more registration, which was more of that propaganda, you know, by the far left, and it had nothing to do with really caring. And my other argument we've made before, if they really care about the children, they would think about how many children die at the hands of our foreign policy, whether it's the drones and the bombs we drop on them or the sanctions that we put on them. I mean, that is what they would have to care about if they really care about children who suffer the consequence, and those who start suffering the consequence of guns and bullets and bombs, government. Yeah. So, and if you compare that to a decreasing amount of school violence here locally, then the real problem is so often government guns when you look at it as a worldwide event.
And you know, the other proposal now is to prohibit those between 18 and 21 years of age from purchasing what they call assault rifles, just high capacity rifles. But here again, Professor Fox says, in the past 35 years, there have been only 5 cases where someone between the age of 18 and 21 used an assault rifle in a mass shooting. So very, very rare, 35 years, only 5 cases. You know, our old co-worker, Penny Langford, posted something on Facebook today, and she pointed out, if you do this, you're going to prevent every young gal on a college campus who may want to have a handgun to protect herself from having a gun. And how vulnerable if someone who's trained, someone who can protect themselves, that seems a very, very unfair thing to do.
Yeah, they talk about the equalizer for women. You know, a little pistol in their purse certainly makes them an equalizer to some thugs on the street.
Yeah.
So I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. I imagine this issue will be around for a while. I think it has to be dissected out in a practical manner, whether the stories and the statistics you hear are correct, and also to look at it in a practical way of do more regulations really help, and also in the area of rights. Who has a right to own a gun and protect themselves, and does it help to undermine that right? Obviously not. I think the founders were right. You know, the right to own and use a weapon, that right should not be infringed. And I believe the country would be better off, and the founders certainly believed that that would be the case, and that's why they gave us the Second Amendment. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.
County, this is Charlotte County COPWATCH, and I wanted to explain what fair use is. You can use pieces of news articles if you're doing it for news reporting, you have commentary, and you're doing it for education purposes. So that's what fair use is, as you can see right here. Another reason why I wanted to make this video is to let you know I just joined with Patreon. A nice thing with Patreon, I make no money on YouTube. They took the money away years ago, and so this is another way to give, and it's a nice thing too because you can give monthly. You can give $1, $5, $10, whatever. I do 4 to 5 hours a day on trying to wake the sheep up on how corrupt it is and different ways that you can fight the corruption. So Patreon is a way that you can do it, and then of course the old way is still there. Donate to Sheriff County Cop Watch with PayPal or credit card. So keep that in mind. 4 to 5 hours a day. I make no money, but the corruption happened to me, and I'm sick of it. So I'm trying to wake people up. But my wife would love it if some, if we could get some help out there. There's 47,000 subscribers. Just think if each one of you subscribers just gave a, let's say, actually, yes, $1 a month. 47,000 subscribers gave $1 a month. That would be awesome. That's not going to happen. But anyways, that would be great if it did happen. But, do the math in your head. Just think about it. Like I said, 4 to 5 hours a day. I get no money from YouTube. YouTube has gone nuts. You can't do anything anymore. They're taking the money away everywhere. So these are a couple different ways that you can still help out with all this time that I put in. And as you know, I'm in a special situation where, at least I can do it, 4 to 5 hours a day. We have a cleaning company during the day. That's what allows me to do this, and we're debt-free. So this is my hobby. I don't go fishing and all that other crap. I try to save the world. So help me out to make the wife happy, man. In fact, if you guys did give $1 a day, and there was 47,000 of you, and you did it, and each of you gave $1, and that was every month, oh my God, yes, I could quit. I could start suing them. Another idea too that we have is, if I got, some funds, we could actually contact everyone that has been ticketed and or arrested and put in jail and start sending them postcards to let them know we're here, and to see if everything went all right, and if it didn't, find out their story. So we could even do more investigations and more lawsuits. Lawsuits take money. So just think about that. 47,000 of you so far right now. $1 a day. $1 a month on Patreon, or $5 a month Patreon, 10, 20, whatever. Just do the math in your head. Help out. This is a lot of work every single day. Thanks.